Welcome to HOA Stories.
I don't care what the code is, you need to let me in right now. This is absolutely unacceptable.
When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect escape from the noise and chaos of city life. The property sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by whispering oaks and the faint glimmer of a pond that mirrored the sky on calm mornings. I wanted peace. After 15 years in law enforcement, I'd had my fill of people, paperwork, and problems that never seemed to end. The plan was simple: buy some land, build a small cabin, and live out my days in quiet solitude. But as I would soon find out, peace doesn't come easy when an HOA president believes she owns the world. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and from the day I closed on my property, she made it her mission to remind me that community rules keep our neighborhood beautiful. That's HOA Code 4, I want to control everything you do. She wore that smug expression, the kind you see on someone who's memorized every line of the bylaws just so she can use them as a weapon. I met her for the first time the morning after moving in. I was unloading my tools from the truck when she appeared at the end of my driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing at the sight of my steel gate. "You can't have that here," she said, her voice clipped and sharp like a ruler hitting a desk. "Have what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. "That gate. It's not in the approved design guide for the neighborhood. We only allow wrought iron or cedar fencing. You'll need to remove it." I smiled politely and kept unloading. "This property sits outside your HOA boundary," I said. "The association ends at that cul-de-sac down the hill. County map confirms it." She blinked, her lips tightening. "That's not correct. All of Willow Creek Estates falls under HOA jurisdiction." I pulled a folded document from my pocket, the one I kept handy for situations just like this. According to the county registrar, my lot was rezoned 3 years ago as part of the rural transition area. The HOA line stops right there. I pointed to the weathered oak tree marking the old boundary. Karen's expression faltered, but only for a second. "I'll have to check on that," she said, scribbling something on her clipboard. "In the meantime, please keep your gate open for community access. Emergency vehicles and HOA inspections require it." That was the moment I knew peace wasn't coming easy. Over the next few weeks, she made it her personal project to harass me. I'd catch her walking up to my gate with her phone out, snapping pictures. She sent letters, one about the unauthorized gravel width, another claiming my truck was oversized for the visual harmony of the neighborhood. I ignored them all. The county didn't care, and technically, neither should she. Still, every day, she'd show up in that beige cardigan, marching down the road like a soldier of suburban order, ready to wage war over grass height and mailbox design. But the real trouble started the morning I shut my gate. It was early spring, the kind of morning when fog rolls off the pond like a thin veil. I'd installed an automatic gate arm with a keypad the week before. Not for security, mostly for privacy. I was tired of HOA drive-bys, where Karen or her lackeys would roll past slowly, pretending to check addresses but really just snooping. That day, after setting the keypad code, I closed the gate for good. I figured it was time to remind them that this was my land, not part of their jurisdiction. An hour later, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I looked through my window and saw her SUV idling in front of the gate. She got out, hands on her hips, glaring up at the closed metal bars like I'd just built the Berlin Wall. A minute later, she was pressing the intercom button. "Mr. McAllister," her voice buzzed through the speaker, "this gate violates HOA policy. You're obstructing access to a community-maintained road." I pressed the response button from my porch. "Karen, this isn't a community road. It's private, deeded to my property. That's not what our maps show. Then your maps are wrong, I said. County records beat HOA spreadsheets every time. Her nostrils flared. You're making this difficult, Mr. McAllister. I'm just trying to keep the community safe. Safe from what? Peace and quiet? That earned me a glare that could melt glass. She stormed back to her SUV, muttering into her phone. I figured she'd file another complaint. What I didn't expect was the escalation that came next. 2 hours later, I was replacing a fence post near the back of the property when I heard sirens, faint at first, then growing louder. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, half laughing. She didn't, I muttered. But she had. 2 county deputies pulled up beside her SUV, lights flashing like it was a drug bust. Karen stood beside them, gesturing wildly toward the gate. I walked up slowly, gloves still on, trying to keep my cool. Afternoon, officers, I said. Problem? One of them, Deputy Harris, a younger guy I knew from town, looked uncomfortable. Sir, this lady called in a trespassing report. Says you're blocking access to HOA property. I raised an eyebrow. Trespassing? On my own land? Karen jumped in. You're blocking a public access road. We have rights to inspect community infrastructure. I leaned on the fence post. Karen, I told you before, this is county land, privately owned. You're trespassing right now, actually. Deputy Harris looked at her. Ma'am, you got paperwork to show this road's public? Karen hesitated. Well, no, but our HOA charter, he cut her off politely. Charter doesn't overrule county property lines. I'll check the database. He radioed dispatch, and we stood there for a few awkward minutes. I could feel Karen's eyes burning into me like she wanted me gone yesterday. Then the radio crackled, that parcel's listed to a Daniel McAllister. Private property, no easements recorded. Harris turned back to her. Sorry, ma'am. He's within his rights. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That can't be right. We've been maintaining this road for years. Then you've been maintaining his driveway, Harris said with a shrug. She went red. I'll be calling our attorney. You do that, I said, turning to walk back toward my workshop. That's when she snapped. Don't think you can hide behind paperwork, Mr. McAllister, she shouted. You're in violation of community spirit. I laughed, couldn't help it. Karen, that's not a law. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't stop there. HOA presidents like her never do. They feed on control, and losing it drives them crazy. Over the next month, she doubled down. She sent certified letters demanding community compliance. She had the HOA board vote to fine me for non-cooperation, even though they had no jurisdiction. I ignored everyone. But then something unexpected happened, something that flipped the entire situation on its head. One afternoon, while checking the county's online property portal for some zoning info, I noticed something odd. There was a small triangular lot right beside my property, about half an acre, labeled HOA Common Area. The note said, for sale due to unpaid property taxes. Apparently, the HOA had missed payments for 3 consecutive years. Curious, I clicked through the details. The price? $3,200. Practically nothing. I called the county clerk the next morning, confirmed the listing was real, and drove down to file the paperwork. 2 weeks later, I was the proud owner of the HOA's common lot, the same strip of land Karen used as her shortcut for inspections. I didn't tell her right away. Instead, I posted a small wooden sign at the lot's edge, private property, no trespassing. I figured she'd notice soon enough. And oh, she did. That Saturday, I was in the garage when I heard tires screech. Karen's SUV came to a stop at the sign. She jumped out, waving her clipboard like a sword. She stomped right past the "No Trespassing" notice and started shouting. "This is HOA property," she yelled, red-faced. "You can't just put up signs." I walked out calmly, coffee mug in hand. "Actually, I can. That lot belongs to me now. You can check with the county." Her jaw dropped. "You're lying." I pulled out the deed copy, crisp and official, and held it up. "Paid in full. Transferred 2 weeks ago. I now own this land, including that gravel path your members keep driving over." Her voice cracked. That's illegal. You can't own community land." "Apparently, your HOA can't pay its taxes," I said. "County sold it. I bought it. End of story." Karen looked like she might faint. She stormed off, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits. I just smiled, went back to my coffee, and thought, now we'll see who's in control. But that was just the beginning. I didn't know yet how far she'd go, how the HOA would turn neighbors against me, how the police would show up again, and how the truth about her past would blow this whole thing wide open. After that day, word spread faster than gossip at a Sunday barbecue. Within a week, half the neighborhood knew that I, the supposed outsider, had bought the HOA's precious common lot. Some thought it was hilarious, others acted like I'd set fire to the community pool. The next HOA meeting, which I wasn't invited to, obviously, turned into a full-blown meltdown. One of the board members, an older guy named Frank, slipped me a text afterward that simply read, "You broke the queen bee's crown." I couldn't have said it better myself. For the first few days, I enjoyed the quiet. The phone calls stopped, the letters slowed, and for a moment, it almost felt like Karen had given up. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like her, it's that they don't quit, they regroup. And she came back swinging harder than ever. It started small, petty things. Someone left an anonymous note taped to my gate, "This isn't the kind of neighborhood we want." Another day, I found tire tracks cut across my grass where someone had turned around too sharply. A few nights later, my motion lights kicked on around midnight, and when I checked the cameras, I caught a glimpse of someone, couldn't see who, standing just outside the gate, holding a phone, recording my property line. It was grainy, but the silhouette looked awfully familiar. Cardigan. Clipboard. I didn't even need to guess. That week, I went to the county office and had "No Trespassing" and "Private Property" notices officially registered to both my main lot and the newly purchased parcel. The clerk chuckled when I explained why. "You wouldn't believe how often HOA folks get themselves into trouble over land they don't actually own," she said. I laughed too, but there was a heaviness behind it. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Saturday morning came bright and early. The pond shimmered like glass, and for once, I thought maybe I'd have a calm weekend. I was halfway through stacking lumber for my workshop expansion when I heard shouting near the gate. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. Karen was there again, but this time, she hadn't come alone. Behind her stood 2 board members, Gail, the vice president who always looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, and Todd, the HOA treasurer who never spoke above a mumble. They had a folded document in Karen's hands, and she was waving it like it was a court order. "Mr. McAllister," she barked. "You've made a serious mistake. The HOA board has unanimously voted to nullify your so-called purchase. That lot belongs to Willow Creek Estates." I leaned on the fence, calm as ever. "You can't nullify a county sale, Karen. The tax deed's legally binding. You obtained it through deception. By paying your overdue taxes?" I said. "If that's deception, I'm guilty." Todd shuffled awkwardly beside her, clearly uncomfortable. "Karen, maybe we should, quiet," she snapped. "We're not backing down. The HOA attorney is preparing a lawsuit." "On what grounds?" I asked. "On the grounds that your purchase undermines community access." I smirked. "You mean it undermines your control?" Her face went crimson. "You're a troublemaker, Mr. McAllister. You think you're clever, but we'll see how clever you are when the sheriff serves you with papers." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, you already tried that once, remember? Didn't work out too well." She glared, then turned sharply and stormed off, her minions scurrying behind her. The dust from her tires hung in the air long after she was gone. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and thought about what she'd said. A lawsuit, huh? It wasn't an empty threat, but I also knew how these HOAs operated. They were all bark and no bite until it came to paperwork. Still, I figured I should get ahead of it, so I called an old friend from my police days, Rick Holloway, now a real estate attorney in the next county. When I explained everything, he laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away. "Man, you bought their land? That's legendary." "Yeah, well, Karen doesn't think so." He got serious. "You're fine legally. The county's sale trumps any HOA claim. But if she tries to harass or trespass again, document everything. She's playing a dangerous game." "Trust me," I said, "I've been documenting since day one." And I had. Cameras, logs, screenshots, recordings. Years on the force had trained me well. You never win by arguing with people like Karen, you win by letting their own actions hang them. Sure enough, a few days later, she walked right into my trap. It was Tuesday afternoon when I saw her SUV parked half on the road, half on my lot. She was standing on the grass, talking loudly to someone on speakerphone, gesturing toward the pond. I turned on the audio from the gate camera and caught snippets: trespassing, obstructing community access, file injunction. I hit record and just watched. She was on my property again, after I'd posted legal notices. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line, gave them my coordinates, and told them a woman was trespassing after repeated warnings. It took about 20 minutes for a deputy to arrive, not Harris this time, but his partner, Deputy Ramirez, a calm and reasonable guy who knew me from town. When he pulled up, Karen marched straight toward him, waving her clipboard like a flag. "Thank goodness you're here." "Arrest him." Ramirez frowned. "Arrest who, ma'am?" "Him. He's blocking the HOA's easement." I stepped out from the porch, hands in my pockets. "Deputy, good afternoon. This woman's trespassing on my land." "Again." Ramirez glanced between us. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing this property belongs to the HOA?" Karen hesitated. "Our charter," he sighed. "I mean official documentation. County deed, map, survey?" She looked flustered. "No, but this land has always been maintained by the HOA. It's part of the community." I held up my folder, the tax deed inside a plastic sleeve. "Registered and recorded 2 weeks ago. County verified." Ramirez took one look and nodded. "That's all I need, ma'am. You're trespassing. I'll need you to leave the property immediately." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "You're taking his side?" "Ma'am, I'm following the law. Please step back to your vehicle." She turned to me, trembling with fury. "You'll regret this, McAllister. You think you're so smart, but you haven't seen what I can do." I didn't respond. I just smiled slightly, and that seemed to make her angrier. She stomped back to her SUV and sped off, gravel spitting from her tires. Ramirez shook his head. You weren't kidding about her. Nope. That's her third visit this month. Keep your cameras rolling, he said. If she shows up again, we'll charge her with harassment. When he left, I stood there for a long moment, staring down the quiet road. For the first time since moving in, I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood spat, it had become personal for her. And personal vendettas rarely end peacefully. The next few weeks were tense. I noticed fewer cars driving past, fewer waves from neighbors who used to say hello. One evening at the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering near the produce aisle, "That's him, the one fighting the HOA." I smiled and kept walking, pretending I didn't care. But I did. I'd moved out here for solitude, not a circus. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived by certified mail, stamped with the HOA logo and a return address marked Whitmore Legal Liaison. I opened it at the kitchen counter, expecting another empty threat. Instead, it was a cease and desist order claiming that my ownership of the lot was fraudulent, and that, pending legal action, would result in the property being returned to the HOA. It was laughable, they had no grounds, but it also listed something that caught my eye, case reference 22-311B, Whitmore v. McAllister. They had actually filed suit. I called Rick immediately. "You're not gonna believe this." He read the document, then started laughing again. "This is pathetic. They don't even have standing to sue. You'll win this easily, but if you want, I'll file a counterclaim for harassment." I thought about it. Let's do it. Maybe it's time to put her on defense for once. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. During that time, Karen doubled down on her campaign. She posted on the neighborhood app, calling me a hostile property owner who threatens the community. She even had someone spray paint HOA traitor on my mailbox one night. I replaced it with a steel one, bolted to the ground. Then, 2 days before the hearing, I got an unexpected visitor. Frank, the board member who'd texted me before, showed up at my gate, looking nervous. I buzzed him in. "Frank, what brings you here?" He looked over his shoulder. "You didn't hear this from me, but you should know, Karen's hiding something." "What kind of something?" He lowered his voice. "That lot you bought? It wasn't the only one the HOA owed taxes on. She's been cooking the books for years. Paying herself administrative stipends. The treasurer caught it and threatened to expose her, but she made him quit." I stared at him. "You're telling me she's been stealing from the HOA?" He nodded. "She's terrified you'll dig into it. That's why she's trying to get your deed revoked. If the county reviews the sale, they'll uncover everything." That hit me like a hammer. I knew Karen was manipulative, but theft? Embezzlement? That was another level. "Frank," I said slowly, "can you get me proof?" He hesitated. "Maybe. I still have access to the shared drive. But if she finds out, she won't. Send me whatever you can." 2 days later, a USB drive arrived in my mailbox. Inside were scanned documents, invoices, tax records, even an email from Karen to herself transferring HOA funds to a personal account labeled WCE Operations. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was a criminal hiding behind HOA paperwork. The morning of the court hearing, I walked into the county courthouse with that USB drive in my jacket pocket, calm and ready. Karen was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, a smug-looking man in an overpriced suit. She didn't even glance at me. When the judge asked for opening remarks, her lawyer launched into a speech about community preservation and unauthorized land acquisition. Then it was our turn. Rick stood up, smiled politely, and handed the judge a packet. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss this case with prejudice on the grounds of factual inaccuracy, and potential criminal conflict of interest. The judge's eyebrows went up. Explain. Rick plugged in the USB drive, showing financial records on the screen. As you can see, the plaintiff, Mrs. Whitmore, has been misusing HOA funds and allowing properties to fall into delinquency. My client legally purchased one of those lots through the county. Her claim that he stole it is baseless and self-incriminating. The courtroom went silent. Karen's face drained of color. Her lawyer whispered something frantically, but it was too late. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, are these documents accurate? I don't know where those came from, she stammered. Then we'll subpoena the HOA's financial records, the judge said. Until then, this case is dismissed. And Mrs. Whitmore, you may wish to contact legal counsel, a different kind. Karen stood there frozen, eyes darting between me and the judge. When she finally turned, the fury in her expression was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Fear. As we walked out of the courtroom, Rick grinned. I think that's game over. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because when people like Karen lose everything, they don't fade quietly. They burn the whole place down on their way out. The courtroom humiliation shattered Karen's perfect world like glass. For years, she'd strutted around Willow Creek Estates like a queen with an invisible crown, convinced that her word was law. Now, that crown had rolled in the mud for everyone to see. The news spread faster than wildfire. By sunset that same day, the HOA group chat, which I wasn't supposed to be part of but still had screenshots sent to me, exploded. Did anyone else hear what happened in court? Karen's being investigated. She used HOA money for personal expenses? It was beautiful chaos. And though I told myself I didn't enjoy it, part of me did. After months of being harassed, called a rule breaker, and having police show up at my gate for no reason, I finally felt the scales tipping back toward justice. But as I should have known by then, nothing about Karen was predictable, not even her downfall. The first week after the court dismissal, she vanished. No morning walks, no SUVs parked near my gate, no board meetings at her house. It was almost peaceful, eerily so. The silence was unsettling, like the quiet before a storm. Then, on the 8th day, the letters started. Each one came in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, typed on an old-fashioned typewriter, were short messages: you don't belong here. You'll regret what you did. Property lines can disappear. They didn't scare me, not exactly, but they told me one thing: Karen wasn't done. She was angry, desperate, and probably alone. I forwarded them to my lawyer and to the sheriff's office, where Deputy Harris added them to the harassment file. Still, with no solid proof, there wasn't much anyone could do. That weekend, I tried to clear my head. I spent Saturday cutting lumber and listening to the sound of the saw drown out my thoughts. By late afternoon, I'd started to relax again. Then I noticed something odd. A car I didn't recognize parked near the pond, just behind the tree line that bordered my property. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine idling. I grabbed my binoculars and zoomed in. The license plate was half covered in mud, but the driver was Karen. She was sitting there, just watching. I went down the hill, slow and steady, phone recording in my hand. As I approached, she startled like a deer caught in headlights. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" I asked. She rolled down her window only halfway. Her eyes looked hollow, darker somehow, like she hadn't slept in days. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "You think you can just embarrass me, destroy my life, and live happily ever after?" I crossed my arms. "Karen, you destroyed your own life. You stole from your neighbors. I just bought land." She gripped the steering wheel tighter. You don't understand what you've done. You've ruined everything. My reputation, my position, my name. You did that to yourself, I said. Now leave my property before I call the sheriff again. Her expression twisted into something almost unrecognizable, a mix of rage and heartbreak. You think this is over, she whispered. It's just getting started. Then she hit the gas and sped off, the car fishtailing on the gravel before disappearing down the road. That night, I barely slept. Every time the wind rattled the trees or a raccoon brushed against the fence, my hand twitched toward the phone. I wasn't afraid of her, I was afraid of what a person like her might do when cornered. The following morning, I went out to check the property, and my stomach sank. Someone had cut the lock off my back gate. The chain was lying in the grass, cleanly sliced. Near the pond, tire tracks dug deep into the mud, leading right to the small utility shed I used for storage. The door was hanging open, hinges twisted. Inside, boxes were overturned, shelves emptied. Nothing valuable was missing, just papers, blueprints, and old HOA mail I'd kept as evidence. I didn't need to guess who did it. I called the sheriff immediately, and within an hour, 2 deputies were combing the area. One of them found a discarded clipboard near the tree line, the same kind Karen always carried. Her initials, KW, were etched faintly into the metal edge. Deputy Harris looked grim. This is breaking and entering, Daniel. We'll open an official case. I nodded. I want a restraining order. Already processing it, he said. By evening, they'd filed the report, taken photos, and promised to patrol the area for the next few nights. I reinforced the locks, added extra cameras, and even set up motion sensors around the shed. I wasn't taking any chances. But while I was preparing for her next move, something unexpected happened. 2 days later, Frank, the same HOA board member who'd helped me, showed up again. He looked shaken. Daniel, you need to see this. He handed me a folder full of printouts, bank statements, meeting minutes, emails. But one line, highlighted in yellow, made my blood run cold. Transfer, $45,000, HOA Reserve Fund Personal Account, K. Whitmore, holy hell, I muttered. Frank nodded. That's not all. The county's investigating. They think she embezzled close to 80 grand over 3 years. That's why she's panicking, the IRS might get involved. I exhaled slowly. So this wasn't about me. It was about covering her tracks. Exactly, Frank said. And now that it's public, she's got nothing left to lose. He was right. 2 nights later, the chaos reached its peak. I was in my workshop around 10 p.m. when the security system pinged, motion detected, front gate. I checked the camera feed and froze. Headlights. A single SUV creeping toward the gate. It stopped just short of the keypad. The driver's door opened. Karen stepped out, wearing a black hoodie and gloves. Unbelievable, I muttered, grabbing my phone. Before I could call it in, she walked right up to the gate and started shaking it violently. You think you can take everything from me? She screamed. You think you can ruin my life and hide behind a fence? I hit the floodlights. The entire driveway lit up like daylight. She froze, caught in the glare, eyes wide. Karen! I shouted through the speaker. You're trespassing again. The sheriff's already been notified. You can't stop me, she yelled, tears streaking her face. I built this neighborhood. I made it beautiful. You ruined it. Her voice cracked into sobs, but then she did something that made my stomach turn. She pulled a can of spray paint from her hoodie and started scrawling something across the gate. I zoomed in through the camera feed, thief. Within 5 minutes, I heard the distant wail of sirens. She dropped the can, tried to run, but it was too late. 3 sheriff cruisers pulled in from both ends of the road, lights flashing red and blue. I stepped out to meet them as the deputies surrounded her SUV. Deputy Ramirez stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, vandalism, and violation of a protective order." She stood frozen, trembling. "You can't arrest me," she whispered. "I'm the HOA president." Ramirez sighed. "Not anymore, ma'am." As they cuffed her, she turned her eyes toward me, filled with hatred and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You've ruined everything." "No," I said quietly. "You did." The deputies led her to the cruiser, and as the door closed, I finally felt something I hadn't in months: peace. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People came out of their houses, whispering, talking, texting. I got more than a few messages, some apologetic, some supportive, a few downright thankful. Frank stopped by later with a half-smile. "The boards voted to dissolve the HOA," he said. "Without Karen, there's no leadership left. Nobody wants to deal with this anymore." I couldn't help but laugh. Guess I got my wish after all. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I got a call from Detective Wilkins at the county office. "Mr. McAllister, thought you'd like to know, Karen's being charged with embezzlement, fraud, and harassment. We found evidence she altered HOA records to hide tax delinquencies. You might be getting subpoenaed as a witness." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the pond. "I'll be there," I said. When the day of her arraignment came, the courthouse felt eerily familiar. Same hallway, same benches, same judge. But this time, she wasn't wearing her signature beige cardigan. She was in county orange. Her hair was a mess, and the confident fire in her eyes had dimmed to ashes. She wouldn't even look at me as they read the charges. The judge denied her bail, citing flight risk and ongoing investigation. When they led her away, I caught a final glimpse of her, a woman who'd spent years policing everyone else, now trapped by her own rules. After that, Willow Creek changed. Without Karen, the neighborhood calmed down. The gossip faded, the endless meetings stopped, and people started minding their own business again. The once feared HOA board turned into a group of regular homeowners sharing coffee and swapping gardening tips. The lot I'd bought, the one that started it all, became my workshop extension, complete with a garden and a small dock by the pond. Sometimes, when I walk past the gate she tried so hard to tear down, I think about how one person's obsession with control can destroy everything they touch. I didn't buy that land to start a war, but somehow, I ended one. And as for Karen? Last I heard, she took a plea deal, 5 years probation, restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. A poetic ending, if you ask me. But every so often, when the night gets quiet and the wind rustles through the trees, I still half expect to hear the echo of her voice yelling, "You'll regret this, McAllister." I smile every time it crosses my mind. Because no, I don't regret it one bit. The weeks that followed Karen's arrest felt like a long exhale, like the whole neighborhood had finally remembered how to breathe again. For the first time since I'd moved into Willow Creek Estates, the sound of birds replaced the constant echo of arguments, meetings, and threats. The gate, once a battleground, now stood quietly beneath the morning sun, a simple symbol of freedom. But peace, I learned, doesn't come without echoes. Even after she was gone, the mess she left behind began to unravel, one thread at a time. The HOA board had crumbled after the lawsuit. Frank and Todd were the only 2 members who didn't immediately resign, but both admitted they were in over their heads. The rest of the neighborhood wanted answers, where their dues had gone, how Karen had gotten away with so much, and what would happen next. I hadn't planned on getting involved. All I wanted was to live quietly and work on my property, but life has a funny way of dragging you into the spotlight when you least want it. It started with a knock on my door one Sunday morning. When I opened it, Frank was standing there again, holding a stack of folders and looking like he hadn't slept. "Daniel, we need help," he said, voice low. "The county froze the HOA account. Nobody knows how to access the records. The IRS is sniffing around, and homeowners are panicking. You're the only one who actually seems to know what's going on." I laughed dryly. "Frank, I just wanted to build a fence and be left alone." "I know," he said, "but people trust you now. You stood up to her when no one else could. That stopped me. I'd never thought about it that way, I was just defending myself. But to the others, maybe I'd been something else, the first guy to say no to Karen's tyranny." After a long pause, I sighed and motioned him inside. "All right," I said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He laid out the folders on my dining table, statements, receipts, letters, and half-completed HOA forms that looked like they'd been written in a hurry. The financials were a disaster. Payments didn't match expenses. Vendor contracts were missing signatures. Half the repairs the HOA supposedly paid for had never actually happened. One invoice listed a landscaping company that didn't even exist. "She built a kingdom on paper," I muttered. Frank nodded. "And when it fell, everyone else got buried under it." I spent the next few days combing through everything, compiling what looked like a mini forensic audit. Years of experience writing reports in law enforcement came flooding back. By Wednesday, I had a thick binder of evidence, not for revenge this time, but for closure. We turned it all over to the county investigator, who promised to clean up the mess. In the meantime, the neighborhood had to decide whether to rebuild the HOA or dissolve it for good. Most folks wanted it gone. No more dues, no more meetings, no more rules about mailbox colors or the proper length of your grass. A few, mostly the longtime residents, were afraid of what would happen without structure. They feared chaos, lawsuits, or property values dropping. So, Frank asked me to attend one final meeting, not as a board member, but as a neighbor. The meeting was held in the community center, the same building where Karen had once ruled like a general. Walking inside, I could almost feel her ghost lingering in the fluorescent light, that tight-lipped smile and judgmental stare. About 30 residents sat in folding chairs, murmuring quietly. When I walked in, the chatter died down. All eyes turned to me, a mix of gratitude, curiosity, and hesitation. Frank stood at the front. "All right, everyone, thank you for coming," he began. "We all know why we're here. The county has confirmed the HOA's financial misconduct, and the board as it stood is officially dissolved. We need to decide what happens next, rebuild or move forward without one." Someone raised their hand. "If we don't have an HOA, who takes care of the common areas?" Frank looked at me. "Actually, Daniel might be the best person to answer that." I stood, feeling dozens of eyes on me. "Most of the common areas weren't technically HOA owned," I said. "They were leased or borrowed from county parcels. The only truly HOA owned lot was the one I purchased. Everything else defaults back to homeowners. You already own what you've been maintaining." Murmurs rippled across the room. A woman near the front asked, "So, we can just live without an HOA?" "Yes," I said. "You can. You're adults. You don't need someone dictating the color of your door or measuring your mailbox." That got a few chuckles. "But," I continued, "you also have to take responsibility. Keep your properties up, respect boundaries, work things out like neighbors instead of adversaries. You don't need Karen's clipboard to have pride in your homes." When I finished, the room went quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, people started nodding. A few even clapped. By the end of the night, the vote was unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. That moment should have been the end of it, the clean break everyone needed. But as the crowd filed out, Frank pulled me aside. His face was pale, nervous. "There's something else," he whispered. I didn't want to say it earlier, but the county found something strange while auditing the HOA records. What kind of strange? Karen wasn't acting alone. I frowned. Come again? She had a partner. Someone helped her falsify the accounts. The transactions were being approved remotely, from an outside device registered to another resident. My stomach tightened. Who? He swallowed hard. Todd. I stared at him, stunned. Todd, the quiet, mild-mannered treasurer who'd barely spoken in any meeting. I'd thought he was just intimidated by her. Turns out, he'd been cashing in. The investigators traced wire transfers between his business and her personal account, Frank continued. They're looking at him for aiding and abetting fraud. Did they arrest him? Not yet. He skipped town 3 days ago. House is empty. That cold, familiar tension I thought I'd left behind crept back into my chest. I knew that pattern too well. People who run always think they can outsmart the law. But Todd wasn't a mastermind. He was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. 2 nights later, that mistake came knocking, literally. It was just after midnight when I heard someone pounding on my door. Hard. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the porch. Who's there? It's me, Frank, came the voice, breathless. I opened the door, and he stumbled in, soaked in sweat, eyes wide. Frank, what the hell, he's back, he gasped. Todd. I saw him near Karen's old house. He was loading boxes into a truck. When I called out to him, he took off. Said something about unfinished business. Unfinished business? I repeated. Frank nodded, shaking. He blames you. He said if you hadn't gone to court, none of this would have come out. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Did you call the sheriff? I tried, but he's gone again. The truck had no plates. That night, I stayed up with the lights on, shotgun propped beside the couch, not out of fear, but caution. I didn't know what Todd was capable of, but after Karen, I'd learned not to underestimate anyone. 3 days later, they found him. The county deputies located his truck abandoned near the interstate, filled with shredded documents and a half-empty suitcase. Turns out, he'd been embezzling not just from the HOA but from his own clients, using their payments to cover Karen's fake maintenance projects. When she got caught, he panicked. He confessed everything in exchange for a lighter sentence, naming Karen as the ringleader. The DA's office was happy to take his testimony. The case against her solidified: mail fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. She was going down for good. When I heard the news, I didn't feel triumph this time. Just a strange, tired relief. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finally closing a chapter that had gone on too long. The county rep called me a week later to say the investigation was complete, and the neighborhood was officially released from all HOA obligations. My property value jumped overnight. Ironically, the land Karen had fought so hard to control now belonged entirely to the man she'd tried to destroy. That weekend, I threw a small cookout by the pond. Frank came, along with a few of the neighbors who'd once avoided me. There was laughter, music, kids running through the grass, the kind of peace that feels earned. At one point, Frank raised his beer and said, "Here's to quiet gates and nosy presidents staying behind bars." Everyone laughed, and I couldn't help but smile. "I'll drink to that," I said. As the sun set over the water, I realized something. this whole ordeal hadn't just been about an HOA war. It had been a lesson in standing your ground, literally and figuratively. Sometimes, peace isn't handed to you, sometimes, you have to fight for it. And when you do, you make damn sure the gate stays closed to anyone who doesn't deserve to be on your side. But I had no idea the final twist was still waiting, something buried deep in the county files that would connect Karen's obsession to something much older, and much closer to home. When the dust finally settled, I thought the story of Karen and the HOA had come to an end. For the first time in months, mornings were quiet again. No letters on the doorstep, no shouting across driveways, no tense stares through the fence slats. I could sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, listen to the wind slide through the pine trees, and feel the steady pulse of peace that had once seemed impossible. But closure isn't always clean. A week after the cookout, I got a call from the county clerk's office. The woman on the line, polite but hesitant, said they'd uncovered an irregular record related to my property title. My stomach knotted for a moment. After everything I'd been through, the last thing I wanted was another legal mess. When I arrived at the courthouse, the clerk handed me a thin, yellowed folder. "This was misfiled decades ago," she said. "It's tied to the parcel you purchased, the one that used to belong to the HOA." I opened it. Inside were brittle survey maps from the 1970s, handwritten notes, and a deed transfer stamped with a name that made my chest tighten, Marjorie L. Whitcomb. Karen's maiden name. I blinked, reading it again. The date on the document was almost 40 years old. The property, her lot, had originally belonged to her parents. They'd sold most of their land when the county rezoned the area for residential development, keeping only a small corner plot. When the HOA formed years later, that last plot had been absorbed into its common area. Which meant, technically, Karen's parents had once owned nearly everything here. I sat back in the stiff courthouse chair, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Suddenly, all of her hostility made sense. She wasn't just being controlling for control's sake, she was trying to reclaim something she believed was hers. For her, the HOA hadn't been a hobby, it had been a resurrection. The more I read, the clearer it became. Karen had spent years maneuvering herself into power, convincing residents that the HOA needed strong leadership, pushing bylaws that gave her control over access points, maintenance contracts, even property easements. She'd essentially built herself a miniature fiefdom on land her family had once lost. And I'd unknowingly purchased the last piece of it. That night, I went home and poured myself a drink. The house felt heavier than usual, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, but thoughtful. I walked out to the gate, the same one that had started everything, and leaned on it, staring across the property line toward what used to be Karen's lot. The moon hung low and bright, silvering the fence rails. I thought about the first time she'd yelled at me for shutting the gate, how her eyes had burned not with irritation but with something deeper, pride, maybe even grief. I'd taken more from her than I realized. But still, that didn't excuse what she'd done. A week later, I visited the county jail. It wasn't revenge, or gloating. I just needed answers. When they brought her into the visitation booth, she looked smaller, the sharp edges gone, her confidence stripped bare. Her hair was gray at the roots, and her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the phone on her side of the glass. "Well," she said with a bitter smile, "if it isn't the man who stole my land." "I didn't steal anything," I said evenly. "I bought it. Fair and legal." Her smile faded. "Fair and legal doesn't mean right. Neither does breaking into people's homes and calling the cops on them," I replied. She sighed, eyes darting away. "You wouldn't understand. My parents built this place. My father laid every post of the old fence line. Then the county decided they could take it away for pennies. When I became president, I just wanted to make things right again. By terrorizing your neighbors? I was trying to protect what was left of them, she said softly. The HOA was the only way I could keep it alive. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Karen, I said finally, you could have built something real with people, not against them. You chose control over community. That's what destroyed you. She stared at me, eyes glistening. And you chose to shut the gate, she whispered. You closed it on everything that used to matter. There was nothing more to say. I hung up the phone and stood. As I walked away, I realized that for all her cruelty, Karen had been haunted, trapped by nostalgia for a world long gone. She hadn't been protecting property, she'd been protecting ghosts. After that day, I didn't think about her much. The town moved on. The neighborhood thrived without an HOA, proving that freedom could coexist with responsibility. People painted their doors whatever color they wanted. Kids played on lawns without fear of fines. The quiet hum of community came back, unforced and real. One evening, months later, I was cleaning out the storage shed when I found the old folder again. Tucked behind the survey maps was a faded photograph, black and white, curled at the edges. It showed a young couple standing beside a newly built fence, smiling proudly. On the back, written in careful cursive, were the words, "Our land, forever ours." M. and J. Whitcomb, 1971. I looked at the picture for a long time. Then I placed it in a small frame and hung it on the wall of my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Land isn't just soil and fences. It's history, memories, and sometimes pain. We inherit more than we realize when we stake our claims. That weekend, I rebuilt the old pond dock, the one the HOA had neglected for years. As I worked, the neighbors came by to help. Frank brought lumber, the Andersons brought sandwiches, and the kids carried nails in coffee cans. By sunset, the dock stretched clean and sturdy over the water again. Frank looked at me and said, "Guess you're the unofficial mayor of Willow Creek now." I laughed. Nah. Just the guy who keeps the gate shut. He grinned. Well, keep it that way. The neighborhood's better for it. When the last board was nailed down, I stood at the edge of the dock and watched the reflection of the houses ripple across the pond. The air smelled of pine and barbecue smoke. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked and kids laughed. It wasn't perfect, it was better. It was real. As night settled in, I glanced toward Karen's old property. The house sat dark and empty, waiting for its next chapter. Maybe someday someone new would move in, someone who didn't carry the ghosts of the past, someone who'd see the land for what it was, not what it used to be. I closed the gate one last time and listened to the latch click into place. The sound was soft, final, the punctuation at the end of a long, chaotic sentence. I'd started this journey fighting for a simple boundary. But in the end, I'd learned that boundaries aren't about keeping people out, they're about protecting the peace you've earned. And as the moon rose over the quiet fields of Willow Creek, I knew one thing for sure, this land, my land, finally belonged to the living again.
Hope you enjoyed this journey into the world of HOA secrets. Remember, behind every door, there's a story waiting to shock you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.